Hello viewers and welcome back to another episode of The Model Guy. And in this episode, I'm going to be taking on Kinetic's CF-18 Hornet kit again and adding some goodies from Kinetic. And one of the goodies that they've recently released is intakes for the FA-18 A to D Hornet. And boy, do these save you some time with this kit. If you visit my other video with the Hornet, I spent a lot of time cleaning up the intakes and the trunks to make everything look nice. And Kinetic's offering in resin saves me about 10 hours having to deal with any of that. These trunks have been very well designed and are drop fit into the kit and are definitely worth the money. Honestly, if you're watching this video and about to build a Kinetic Hornet, stop the video, go over to Reskit and order the trunks. You can thank me later, you will not be disappointed. Once the intakes were assembled, it was just a matter of firing some insignia white down the trunk, then masking it, followed up with some light ghost gray. Be sure to check your references for the Hornet though, because those intake demarcation lines are a little bit farther back than you think and not where those trunks glue into place. One tip I can give you for painting aircraft models is to paint behind the intakes before you install them if possible. This avoids a lot of dusting that you'll get if you try to aim an airbrush in those tight areas. Reskit also sent me their engines for the Kinetic kit, but I wanted to install those last, so I removed the supports inside the kit. That way I could complete painting, assembly, and rescribing without worrying about damaging the resin. After verifying there was no fit issues with the engines, it was time to finish up the intake installation. With the superglue sanded flush, I simply rescribed the line using a razor saw and 3M flexible tape to guide it. Some light passes left a very clean line, and then it was time to move on to what I consider the worst part of the Kinetic kit, and that is the waist. I've built this Kinetic kit 3 times now, and on all 3 builds, the rear of the jet does not line up. The edges of the rear want to roll inwards, and it doesn't give you a nice flat join. So I've found that putting some thick styrene in the back will force those halves out to line up a little bit better. But even after doing all that, there's a lot of rescribing to do because the join line goes right through the formation light on the waist, and that can be a pain to rescribe. There are a lot of complaints about the way the nose fits on the Kinetic kit, but by thinning down the outside of the locating tab on the bulkheads, you can get the nose to line up a lot nicer. John Chung cracked this code a few years ago and put the pictures up on his Facebook page. He's known as Scale Scriber, and he's got some great pictures on there for where to trim down the nose. With just a few minutes work, you can have that nose fitting a lot better than it does out of the box. After the Scale Scriber adjustments, I have pretty much no problem getting the nose to sit in place and it's ready to be glued. And then it's time to go back and deal with the rear of the aircraft. If you are choosing to build the Kinetic kit, this is where you're going to spend the most amount of time is cleaning up these seams. Lately I've been using black superglue, also known as rubber superglue, because it's a little bit easier to sand and clean up, and then it's easier to scribe as well. I find that regular clear superglue dries too hard and it takes a lot of effort to get it to sand flush. And with that rescribing complete, the aircraft is now in paint ready for decals. You're probably scratching your head wondering what just happened here, why didn't you show us the painting process? And let me explain. I recently went down to the Salt Lake City Rocky Mountain Hobby Expo a few days ago, and I had a big presentation there on how I do my painting process, weathering, and all that good stuff. You've also watched me paint enough Navy aircraft on this channel that you kind of know my technique for the paint, so I skipped ahead a little bit here. The only difference this time with the Canadian Hornet is that the top side was painted with US Navy medium blue gray. And if you're looking for decals to do your Canadian Hornet, you're going to want to hit up Leading Edge Decals. They're actually based here in Calgary, and I had a set on hand so I could do a modern Hornet. And yes, those are bomb marks on the side of the Hornet from missions flown during Operation Impact. That might come as a surprise to some people that, holy crap, Canada dropped bombs and killed people, but I can assure you, if Canada's choosing to bomb them, they must have done something pretty significant to piss off the Canadians. To add some bling to this kit, Reskit also hooked me up with some GBU-12 paveway bombs. These bombs are 3D printed and designed in such a way they make assembly very easy for the average modeler. I use black superglue for assembly, and then I just use some debonder to remove any excess glue that I didn't want in place. And the nice thing about these bombs is you can keep them separated for easier painting. One other thing that had to be added to this kit to match the op impact loadout was I had to get some 9 mic sidewinders. Now, you're probably wondering, why isn't Canada using the 9X? And the reason for that is we just recently had these added to our aircraft and are capable of firing them. We're only a few years late to the show for that. Like 19 years late. Once again, these are 3D printed by Reskit and look pretty nice on the sprue. However, these ones did have some layer lines. So I used Mr. Surfacer 500 as a thicker primer, and after 2 base coats and a little bit of sanding, they were ready to go on the jet. And in my opinion, that's a lot easier than trying to glue 2 halves of a missile together and then clean up the seam line and then paint it. One of the nice things about Reskit's ordnance is it comes in a way that you can attach. The nice thing about Reskit's bombs is they actually come with the shackles in place, so you can pretty much mount them to any aircraft you want. It'll just take a little bit of modification and cleanup to get them in place so they sit properly on the pylon. Both the bombs and missiles came with plenty of decals, and then it was time to move into paint. And some of you are going to ask some questions here of why I didn't follow Reskit's guide for the bombs, and that's because on the Hornets I was using for reference photos, the bombs were gray, the same as the modern US Navy ones. As I stated earlier, the nice thing about Reskit's bombs, you can paint them in sections and save yourself a lot of time masking. So here the main bomb body's painted, then masked off, and then the seeker components are painted with a light ghost gray. After painting the AIM-9s a light ghost gray, I masked those off and painted the end with dark iron from Mr. Metal Color. And the nice thing about that is you can polish it up a little bit to make it shiny. In my opinion, that makes it look a little more accurate when compared to a real-world Sidewinder. I'm not sure who Reskit is using for their decals, but they went down on the kit very nicely. Even the wraparound yellow stripes for the bombs and missiles went down with no issues, and I didn't tear any of the decals. You also get some pretty small decals for the ordnance, so make sure you take your time getting it in place. Here's the final assembly with a pin wash in place and then ready for a flat coat. Same with the Sidewinder. Lots of detail here, lots of decals, and ready to go on the aircraft. Now it was time to move on to one more set of goodies from Reskit, and that is the CF-18 Hornet landing gear. Now you might be asking yourself, what makes the Hornet's landing gear different than an American Hornet? And there's 2 things. One, the nose gear does not have the holdback bar that they use on the boat, and the second, we use a different style shock on the main landing gear. Now, what surprises me is that Reskit actually took the time to design these for Canadian Hornets. Although I am very appreciative to see some Maple Leaf love out there. If you're worried about the landing gear holding the weight of the Hornet, I don't think you need to because they give you some rods that go down inside the landing gear. And Navy landing gear is bulky enough that you could probably get away with not using the rods. They're already cut to length, and the diagrams show you very clearly where they need to go. Once they are in place, I just put a little bit of super glue on the end to keep them from backing out. Reskit's landing gear set also includes the tires and wheels, and they are very, very nicely detailed, and everything just clicks together and would probably hold in place without glue. To make these tires a little more interesting, I used Mr. Color Tire Black as the main color, and then used a black pin wash to really make those tires pop. This adds quite a bit of contrast to make them stand out a little bit more when they're tucked underneath the aircraft. With the landing gear legs painted, I used a mechanical pencil to polish the band clamps that hold the hydraulic lines in place, and this gives it a little bit of a shine compared to the flat paint and makes them pop out just a little bit. To remove the clear film for the landing gear light, I used a hole punch and don't really advise using the glue base to make that happen, but it worked. With it cut out, I just used some white glue to lock it in place. With a final pin wash on the landing gear legs, they were ready to be removed from the print supports and be installed into the aircraft. Once again, Reskit shows why they are one of the masters of 3D print design because they dropped right into place with no issues. Once the landing gear legs and wheels were in place, it was time to install the ordnance, and these again were just installed with some super glue and allowed to dry. I've noticed that one thing I do in my videos is I skip through the weathering process with the oils pretty quickly. So I decided to take some extra time here to break down what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So for these hydraulic leaks on the wings of the aircraft, I'm using Absolung oil paints. What I'm using is using the Starship Filth, adding a few dots, and then trying to make one quick streak to keep everything lined up. And if I'm not happy with how they look, I can actually use another brush to push the oil back into place where I want it. Now this style of paint here on the nose is kind of a quick and dirty rendition of oil paint rendering. What I'm doing is mapping out where I want the cordite stains to be on the nose of the aircraft. Once I have the oils in place, I'm using a Deerfoot stippling brush to push them down and blend them into the paint below. This is something that takes a few layers to do to get it right, but in the end, you can get a really nice smoke effect. After using the Deerfoot stippler, I'm now using a different brush to add some streaking into that cordite staining. This is just where the crew would be brushing up against it, how the gun fires, and it's just one of the few base layers before adding more on top. For around the access panels where there's going to be a lot of dirt and grime from the crew handling this, I'm just adding some small dots of oil paint that have a little bit of thinner in them, and then once again using that Deerfoot stippler to kind of blend them into place. And again, I could use just Starship Filth, but I also add in a little bit of mud and dust just to break up the colors and make it more interesting. One of the nicest things about oil paints is if you really screw up and you don't like how it's looking, you can use some enamel thinner on a shop towel and just wipe it away and start again. Now to get the wet effects on the wings, I'm using MIG's engine oil. And the nice thing about this is it is an enamel, so you're able to streak it out and blend it, but it's a little bit less forgiving than the oil paints. If you want to clean it up, I find you have to use a lot of enamel thinner to get it off the paint, and you can cause some damage. So just take your time and slowly build up the effect. I can hear people now saying that this is way too much weathering, it's overdone, doesn't match the jets, etc. No crew chief would ever. Well, here's the thing. These jets are 40 years old, and they do show that age. Now, the Canadian maintainers that work on these aircraft do a fantastic job keeping them up in the air, but the reality is they're coming close to the end of their service life here in a few years. So there's always leaks, there's always hydraulics and things coming off. But if you want to do a really good weathering job on your model, the best advice I can give you is to have good references. If you have a good reference and you can use that as a base for your weathering, you're going to have a fantastic model. The last thing to go into place here on the model are the engines from Reskit, and they are beautifully detailed. I painted the engine nozzles with Mr. Metal Color dark iron and then just polished them a little bit to get that nice metallic effect. And now to get the polishing inside the engines, I used a little bit of dark iron powder from Vallejo and polished it with a silicone brush. And with that, this model was pretty much coming to a close. So once again, Reskit, thank you so much for sending this stuff for me to build this kit. It was great to work with, and I have zero complaints to make about it. I purchased a lot of Reskit stuff in the past and after building this, so I can let people know watching this video, you will not be disappointed with their quality. Check them out. They are a Ukrainian-based company, and they are doing some fantastic work. To my friends at the Rocky Mountain Hobby Expo, once again, thank you so much for the invite. I had a blast, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next year. It was a pleasure, and I enjoyed doing that seminar. I am the model guy. I'm going to sign off and head back to the bench, but here's some photos of this build for you to enjoy.